I'm with the Altair Aerospace and Defense Technical Team, located in Irvine, California. Um, Working a lot with aerospace defense customers here in the US West region. Um, Today, I'm delighted to introduce you to some of the mesh morphing functionality that's in HyperMesh. Um, just going to go through sort of, where the ribbons are, what the different buttons do, and maybe show some sort of practical applications. Really, mesh morphing has got, I think, three major kind of drivers behind it. The first one is if you spend some time, cleaning up a geometry, maybe making some simplifications, spending some time to get a really nice mesh on it, and then there's some changes, some small localized changes to that geometry or parts of that geometry. It's often a lot quicker to just take the mesh that you have and morph it to reflect the new design changes, rather than going through the whole process again of re-importing CAD, cleaning up, simplification, building your mesh, checking the quality, etc. So that's one use case. The second one is when you want to do maybe a shape change study, a design of experiment study, or an optimization where you're looking for you have an allowable range of shape change, if you want to think of it that way. And so you can create what we call a shape within HyperMesh, which is where you morph the mesh to create a deformation and record the vectors that reflect that deformation. And then you can scale those vectors. So it's essentially getting a shape between A and B, or even going beyond B. But recording that shape change, so that's another application of morphing, and then being able to use that shape change in a parametric study or an optimization. And the third kind of main use case is where you have a complex geometry that's maybe not lending itself to discretization very well. And so what you can do is you can, particularly if sort of tetra meshing is not an option. I'm thinking solid meshing here. Tetra meshing is not an option. Whatever the solver is, you requires hex or hex dominated meshes, or for whatever reason you prefer to have a hex dominated mesh. In that case, you can kind of create a hex mesh on a primitive, a blocky structure, and then morph it to reflect the curvature of the actual geometry. So let me jump in here to some examples. Let's start out with something fairly simple. So when you're in the HyperMesh interface, you'll find the morph ribbon here on the drop down. It's on by default. If it's not there, you can go to your view drop down and then ribbons, and you should see morph is turned on here. Within the morph ribbon itself, we have a few 6 different icons, so it's fairly nicely arranged. We also have under this morph drop down arrow some more advanced features. This is kind of harking back to the origins of morphing within HyperMesh, with some of the older, maybe more complex features there. But I'm going to predominantly focus on the ones that are on the ribbon. These are our new workflows, trying to simplify the whole process of morphing. So we start with free morph, seen as I think that's the most general approach. So if I click on free morph, I get a guide bar here that pops up. And really working from sort of left to right, the hamburger menu here, we've got a number of different options, and maybe I'll get to those in a second. But usually the defaults are reasonable. And then you pick something that you're actually going to move. So face, a node, an edge. And then if I had some domains or shapes, they're grayed out because they don't exist in this model right now, but if I did, you could pick those as well. So if we pick a point here on the structure, one thing to note is this automatic box is checked here. That means that my anchors and my morph area is going to be defined automatically for me. And this is generally a nice functionality, but you can disable it by turning it off, and you can manually pick those options as well. So when we talk about anchors, we're picking what's moving. We can also pick what's not moving. And basically the morph then is the interpolation between what moves and what doesn't. I'm going to go ahead with the automatic workflow right now. So I'm picking a point that it's going to move. And again, you can pick a point, a base, and edge. We'll look at that as we work through this demo here. So I'll pick this point here. And it very quickly defines this orange ball is what's moving. The black balls, hopefully you can see, these are the anchors. So this is the automatically defined anchoring. So what it does is it says, okay, I'm moving this point, it's connected to these faces. So these faces are likely going to make up my morph region. So the morph area is automatically selected as well. And then the anchors are defined as kind of where those kind of logical conclusion of those morph areas. So where it's attached back to the rest of the structure. The other thing you'll notice is what pops up. So it pops up this manipulator tool. And if you've been working in HyperMesh, this should be reasonably familiar. And this allows us to, we can drag in a direction. So we drag that point, and you can see how the structure morphs reflecting that change. Control Z is your friend here, so you can undo things that you didn't mean to do. We can drag in this direction, drag in this direction. We can step back to undo all that. You got rotations as well. You can move on a plane, so we can keep it on the plane, but sort of manipulate it, things like that. So it's all very nice. We can also move the manipulation too, particularly if you're interested in doing some kind of rotations. If you hold down the Shift key, the manipulator turns orange, allowing us to grab it and put it somewhere else. So I can snap it to a node over here, and then if I release Shift, I can now go ahead and now I'm just going to rotate about this point here. So we've got lots of nice options there to move and manipulate that. So that's kind of the basics of the morphing. If I'm not happy with the boundary conditions, so the automatic selection, I can just uncheck at this point. Everything stays selected, so it still has all the anchors that it automatically selected, but maybe for some reason I want my anchor to be sort of halfway along here. I can then go in here and I could say, let's adjust this a little bit. I want these anchors, and then you can also, holding down Shift here, we can unselect the other anchors, and I can adjust my morph area as well. So again, holding down Shift to unselect these particular elements. And so now this is my new region. And again, we can drag the manipulator, and we're now morphing in this new space. So just showing that what we can do there. So the automatic is nice to kind of get you started, and then oftentimes you're going to uncheck it and adjust as necessary. So yeah, that's kind of the basics of the free morph tool. The burger menu, remorph changes. So this is an option that you can turn on. What this allows you to do is, as you're morphing and you make adjustments, you don't have to undo the morph, make the adjustments, and then redo it. You can actually do a morph, and then you can make changes. Obviously, there's a bit of a performance hit. So if you turn this on, things may move a little slower, but it doesn't mean that you can adjust things like the morph method, biasing, and so on. And I can maybe show a little bit of that too. Let me exit out of here. Another good friend is this red arrow here. So anything you do in this morphing tool, when you're in this ribbon, if you haven't done another operation, they'll all be undone. You click on the little red arrow here, which is nice. Okay, so let's go over here at the end, kind of give maybe a more practical example of what we want to do here. Here, for example, this rib doesn't quite get to the end. So maybe that was a geometric flaw in the geometry that came in, or it might have been, this was mid-meshed and meshed. Maybe something went wrong there, but it doesn't quite go to the end. So I want to correct that. So let's go to free morph. This would be the right tool. I'm going to turn on my automatic friend over here, and I'm going to say, okay, I want to grab this little node here. And ideally, it's kind of difficult to see with the color, but I want to pull it out to the end. I could grab it like that, but you can kind of see that it drags, it's connected to the rest of the mesh, so it's kind of dragging everything with it. So it's not ideal, because now the mesh is going to be all messed up. So again, I'm going to undo that. I'm going to come out of this tool. I'm actually going to detach this section for kind of a temporary detachment. So we go back here, detach. We want to pick elements. Holding down the Alt key, this allows me to select by face. And I want to detach it from, and again, I can hold down the Alt. So, not all that. Let's just go, you can detach it from, elements. So let's go grab this. Okay, so I'm going to detach it from these elements here. And let's say go ahead. Okay, it's detached. Doesn't really look like it's detached, but it's detached. You can check on that. can go down here. There's a node option, and if you kind of, this is kind of my method. I grab a box. It's selecting 2 nodes at that node point, so that tells me it's detached. Another nice kind of functionality here is if we go to the preference tools, so file, preference, is there's a coincident node selection. We can search for it here. It's under HyperMesh application, but if you don't know where it is, just type in coincident. So under HyperMesh application selection, you got this coincident node. If we turn that on, okay. Now when you go to select a node, you'll see 2 nodes appear, and then if you hover over them, it kind of highlights. So this node, for example, is on that bottom plate, and this node is on the rib that comes up. So you can see kind of based on the highlighting which node is which. I'm going to turn that on for this little operation here. Back here on the should still be attached. So again, you see there's only 1 node here. Select this one. It did detach down here in the corner. Maybe I didn't want, but that's fine. Now let's go back to morphing. So morph, and we go back to free morph, and we'll select our little friend over here. And then again, we need to make sure we're selecting the right one. So the node that's a part of the rib. And I want to move this node. I didn't talk about targets yet. So target means that I don't want to just drag it, and I could manually sort of drag it and say, okay, that looks like it's kind of on the edge. But why not actually pick the edge as a target? So you have morph targets, so surfaces, lines, elements, nodes, planes, etc. So here we're going to actually do node, and move this GUI out of the way. So I can pick here these nodes on the edge. And now that I've picked those nodes, you see I get the dialog changes. So it's asking me, hey, do you want to morph to this node list that you just picked? And I do. So I'm going to the default direction isn't going to be normal to that, so I'll pick okay, morph, and it morphs to that node list. But it hasn't done exactly what I wanted because it's come off. You can see here these nodes are it's no longer on that line of nodes that it should be on. So that's not exactly what I want. So Control Z that to say, okay, don't do that. Let me go back here. And I can change the direction. So I want this now to be normal to target. Sorry, along a vector. Sorry, it was normal to target. And then I can go back here and I can pick this vector direction, and I can say, go back here, pick this guy again, and target. Oh, yeah, need to hit escape. And then I can morph to that node list. So there, and it comes along, and it's no longer being shifted sideways. So that's my morph done. I've now got this rib where it needs to be, but it is still detached from the rest of the structure down here. So what we can do is we can go back to our fuse tool. So if we go to here on the 2D page, we have this fuse tool, which is kind of a nice way of stitching things together. And I can select source elements. So again, hold down Alt to pick here, and the target set of elements here. And we just tell it, okay, go ahead and fuse those together. And so everything gets nicely stitched up. And we can check, again, using my foolproof method of drawing a box and seeing that there's only 1 node there. Okay, so everything now stitched back together. Make sure, yeah, back there in the corner as well. And so that's an example of where you might use morphing, in that scenario. Let me jump ahead to a different model here. Yeah, we want to look at some of the other options that we have. So the next one, the proximity tool. A lot of the functionality is similar to what we did with free morphing, except rather than defining a morph area, it's kind of automatically defined. So let me go ahead here, and don't like these rivet points, kind of annoying me. So I am going to turn some of these off, hide those. Okay. And let me see here. Okay, so let's go proximity tool. So we pick some nodes that we want to move. Make it a nice kind of square patch. So you pick the nodes you want to move, and then there's a couple of different options. It basically is picking an affected area, and if we click on this drop down, so you get this little GUI here that pops up. So you can do morph only moving, which means I'm only affecting these nodes. And if I were to, and you can, there's an option here that switch rather than having the kind of three-dimensional manipulator, you can actually say, okay, I want to just go normal to the plane of these, and I can do morph only those moving, so nothing else gets morphed. So, but that's not always what you want. If you hit escape on the keyboard, it drops back to the previous menu. Morph by distance, which is the default that came up. This is showing me that based on this distance of 56, not sure how to, this particular value, that this is the affected zone. And you can make that bigger, so we can make that 100, so you can get something like that. And now I can, again, drag my, and you see, obviously it's affecting a larger area around it, like that. Again, escape brings you back to the previous menu. And then you have morph by factor. I think this one's kind of cool. And what this does is as you're morphing, it's growing the affected area. So we can start to pull things up, and the more you pull it up, you see that the affected area starts to grow. And you can see here, it's also going to drag that rib with it as well, just like that. So it's kind of making a nice mess of everything. But yeah, just to show you can do that. One other thing to show here, if I drop this option here at the end, so you've got, right now when I morph this, it morphs the rib, but if you undo that, you can uncheck that morph. And then now as you drag it up, oh, maybe that's just for the distance one, it shouldn't affect the parts that are not connected. So let me try that again. Go back to morph by distance. I'll make this distance maybe 200, and then still, okay. Yeah, this one, it should then not affect the parts that are not physically connected to it. Maybe did something wrong there. Okay, so that's the proximity tool. So it's nice that you don't have to, especially if you've got a large structure, you can just say, I want the affected zone to be a certain amount. I'm also going to use this to show some of these options. So if I turn on the remorph changes, and we go back here again, and we select some nodes to move, the secondary update. And so if I drag these down, up like that, we can go then and see what's the effect of some of these things. So right now there's a biasing on the moving nodes and a biasing on the non-moving nodes, and you can adjust that as well. So if we wanted a more sort of gentle effect, so now you see that this is more domed around the nodes that move. Change it back to sort of seeing a sharper, more of a biasing in that favor. And then the other nodes that are the non-moving nodes back here, I can again also say affect the biasing there, and so you get a smoother transition. So if we went with something like that, you see now you get a smoother hump and a smoother region here where the end of the transition zone is. So you can affect changes like that. Additional anchors. So if there are points that you've decided, oh, these points really shouldn't move, you can add those additional anchors to these additional anchors, and then as you can see, because I still have the remorph changes option on, those go back. They will not, so they stay where they were basically. And then as you manipulate your structure, those points are not allowed to move. So that's the additional anchor option here. Yeah, so proximity morph gives you that nice functionality where you can just do a localized morph without having to worry about where your morph transition zones are. Let me go on to the last one here, volumes. So grab another model. Actually, I'll do the same. Let's just do the same model here. Keep this one in the interest of time. And exit out of this. I'm going to just delete some parts here to make it a little bit easier. Okay, so if I wanted to make some really macro level changes to geometry, that's where morph volumes are. So we can select a large structure like this, and we choose to enclose it. So that's kind of the first option here on the guide bar. And this, you've got some options. So this will be if we use a global system, so it maps kind of to this global system here. And then that's maybe not exactly what I want. You've got local. So if you do local, you could select a local system for your enclosure. So for example, we could select this little system down here, and then we can close everything, and we'll be able to create that system there. Let me go back here a sec. I'm just going to get rid of this volume that I created. So let's just delete that. What I'm actually going to use here is best fit. So best fit, and we'll go ahead and we'll choose to enclose these elements in the best fit. So it's kind of in the plane of the part. So that's kind of what you get. And then you can choose to have a number of different, you can create a matrix of these boxes, or morph volumes as they're called. So we'll do something like that. Maybe we'll create 2 in this direction. Once you have the boxes created, we can go to the move tool. Now we're able to manipulate the shape of these boxes. So we can, for example, go here, and I can grab the corners of that sort of midplane. Again, if you hold down Shift, we can adjust this manipulator tool so it's kind of lined up the way I want it. And I want to move this, so it's still on adjust volumes. We can sort of move this volume here so it's kind of aligned here, and I just wanted to move this end section to maybe make it a bit longer. If I'm happy with that, I can go back, and now you can switch this move option from adjust volumes to morph, and we can grab this end plane. Again, hold down Shift, move this to where I want it to be, and drag this. And so now you can see kind of creating a more macro level morph. It's making changes over here that I didn't want it to do. So let me Control Z this, and you have this edges option here. So edges allows, you can see here, this is basically telling you, the changes in this volume will affect this volume and so on. So we can just make it a one-way coupling, or you could get rid of this altogether, but let's just do this way. So now this change shouldn't affect the volume on the left. Again, it's around a bit. And now if I drag it, you see, so this, only this volume is being morphed, and you can make some, so if you wanted to make some, just kind of more macro level changes to the geometry. You've got lots of options here too with your morph volumes on splitting and so on. I quickly wanted to give a couple of other more practical demos. This one here, for example, if we wanted to make this shaft, the diameter down here a little bit bigger, we can go into our topology section. I can first very quickly going to make a slightly larger boss down here, so we can create a circle. We can extrude this, extrude lines, extrude like that. Let me just kind of snap it to the far side. So now I have this basically created this new geometry. And that's gonna, I want my mesh to kind of morph to that. So we go to morph over here. We can do free morph on this. What I want to move are faces. So I want to pick these faces that form that region there. The target is a surface, so that surface that I just created. And you get a couple of different options, but just morph to surface, and you get something like that. So there you go, like a really practical example, very quick and easy to adjust a diameter like that. Okay, we got a few minutes left. I was going to show a kind of more complex example. This is one where I was talking about, difficult to morph geometry, and we wanted to put a hex mesh. This was actually a real example. So they wanted to put a hex mesh on a part like this. So the start point was, let's create this blocky, this is easy to hex mesh. Now let's just morph it then to this structure. There's a couple of steps involved, but basically the workflow is you start by moving vertices, like these corner points, onto the part, then you move the edges on, and then eventually you morph the faces as well. So the workflow, yeah, you do have to kind of clean it up a little bit. First, there was some suppression required, so we wanted to suppress out some edges here, so get rid of this guy and this guy, and instead then we were gonna split it. So we're gonna grab from this corner here, kind of creating a split to there. Stop it, snapping, and split to there, and then again, it's kind of gonna just randomly create some split lines like that. So that kind of reflects kind of this shape underneath is going to be projected in a way to this. And then on this side here, we can also do something like that. And then once you have cut up your geometry, you're then going to go back here. We go to the morph panel, and then we just start. First of all, so I'm going to grab this point here. Automatic works okay. As I kind of went through this process later on, I do have to start defining my anchors, but I think, oops, give that a sec. Let's go again here. So yeah, select the point. You have to give it a second to figure out where everything is. And then I want to just drag it on here. So just kind of, you start going through this process. I also find that it's easier to just exit out of the tool than to try and start resetting everything. And I want to get that there. Because this is what happens. It starts to add to the selection. Okay, so let's do that one. Drag that guy over there. Yeah, I'm just going to go with what I'm used to. Grab this guy. Put him there. Yeah, we're not going to have time to do this in the session here, but yeah, this is kind of, let me kind of see if I can do one face. Get this guy, move him down there, and then you go on to doing edges. Then we're going to say grab this edge, and the target is going to be the lines. So I'm going to start moving this down here. This is where we start then having to say, okay, I don't want just the selected anchors. I also actually want to get just that, but additional anchors. And then we kind of go by face, I think I was doing. I don't know what's picking everything there. Maybe I'll go back to automatic. Okay, yeah, so I'll just put this one here for now. So this line down here, say morph the line. This line here, it's gonna go to this line. And then sort of eventually, when you kind of have to go around all the edges first, and then you can go to faces, and then you'll say, I want this face. This is where you kind of have to play around with this to select just the elements you want. And then the target is now going to be the surface. So you pick the surface and then sort of morph the surface. And so you kind of work through them all, and you can kind of start to see that it started. Yeah, we had some problems here. So you start to see that you can, I did it earlier here, but it takes a bit of a while, and then you get, stepping through the process, you get this hex mesh on your geometry. Yeah, just wanted to show that, that is an application. Particularly, we see it in sort of biomedical stuff where you've got very organic shapes that need to be, bones and stuff that need to be hex meshed. Okay, so that was kind of my quick intro to morphing in HyperMesh. I thought I saw a question in the chat there. I think my colleague Bijan has answered. Yeah, so that's kind of, this is just a kind of quick overview intro. There's a lot of functionality in there. If you do have further questions, I encourage you to reach out to your technical representative, or account manager or whoever you know at Altair. Or if you don't know who to reach out to, just go on our Altair One web portal, so altair1.com, and in there you can request support. Thanks everyone. Happy morphing.